I stared at the contract laid before me, my wedding dress suddenly feeling too tight as Richard Bennett Sr., my soon-to-be father-in-law, loomed over me with a Mont Blanc pen extended in his manicured hand. "Sign it, Miss Zhang," he said, his voice dripping with the same condescension I'd endured since his son first brought me home. "Unless you prefer I tell the 300 guests waiting downstairs that there won't be a wedding after all." My name is Alice Zhang, and 2 hours before what should have been the happiest moment of my life, I was trapped in the bridal suite of the street Regis Hotel, facing an impossible choice. "Dad, this is ridiculous," Richard Jr. protested weakly from his position by the window. "Alice isn't after our money." His father's laugh was sharp and cold. "Of course she is. They all are." He turned back to me, eyes narrowing. "A girl from her background suddenly landing a Bennett? Please." My background, he spat the word like it tasted bitter, was his favorite weapon against me. I'd grown up in a middle-class family in Queens, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who ran a small accounting firm. I'd worked my way through Columbia on scholarships and part-time jobs, graduating with honors in finance. But to Richard Sr., I would always be beneath them. "The terms are simple," he continued, tapping the contract with one finger. "In the event of a divorce, you walk away with nothing. No alimony, no property rights, no shares in Bennett Industries. You'll leave with exactly what you came with, nothing." I felt tears threatening to spill but forced them back. I hadn't cried in front of this man yet, and I wouldn't start now. "And if I don't sign?" His smile was predatory. "Then I'll ensure there's no wedding to worry about. And believe me, your career in finance will be over before it begins. No one crosses the Bennetts." I looked at Richard Jr., my rich, silently pleading for him to stand up to his father just once. But he only managed a helpless shrug. "It's just a formality, Alice. It doesn't mean anything." But it meant everything. It was one more way for Richard Sr. to remind me that I didn't belong in their world of old money and older prejudices, that no matter how much his son claimed to love me, I would always be an outsider. What neither of them knew was that I had already signed a different contract 3 months ago, one that would change everything. I picked up the pen, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. Richard Sr.'s smile widened as I bent over the document, but he couldn't see what I was thinking about. The late nights I'd spent in my office at Goldman Sachs, poring over Bennett Industries' financial records, following a trail that had led me to a devastating discovery. "There," I said, signing with a flourish. "Happy now?" "Ecstatic," he replied dryly, snatching up the contract. "Welcome to the family, Miss Zhang. Try not to embarrass us." After he left, Rich tried to hug me, but I stepped away. "I can't believe you let him do that." "You know how he is," Rich sighed. "It's easier to just give him what he wants." I turned to the mirror, adjusting my veil to hide my trembling hands. Yes, I'm learning that about both Bennett men. The wedding was exactly what you'd expect from one of New York's wealthiest families: extravagant floral arrangements, a 10-piece orchestra, celebrities mingling with politicians and Wall Street titans. I smiled through it all, played my part perfectly as Richard Sr. introduced me to his friends with barely concealed disdain. "Alice works in finance," he'd say, as if it were a quaint hobby, "though I'm sure she'll want to focus on family now." What he didn't know was that my job at Goldman wasn't just a career, it was the position that had allowed me to uncover the truth about Bennett Industries, about the shell companies, the cooked books, the billions in missing funds. I found it all 3 months ago, during a routine due diligence investigation for a potential merger. That same night, I'd taken my findings to Sarah Chin, head of the SEC's Financial Fraud Division, and more importantly, my mother's oldest friend. She'd helped me construct a plan, one that required me to stay silent, to play along, to let Richard Sr. think he'd won. The contract I'd signed with the SEC as a confidential informant was safely locked away in Sarah's office. The evidence I'd gathered was backed up on servers the Bennetts would never find. All I had to do was wait, watch, and continue gathering information from my new position as a Bennett insider. That night, after the last guest had left and Rich was snoring softly beside me in our hotel suite, I slipped out onto the balcony and called Sarah. "It's done," I whispered. "He made me sign a prenup." "Perfect," Sarah replied. "That'll make it even sweeter when it all comes out. How long do you think you'll need?" I looked out over the city lights, thinking about the years ahead. playing the dutiful daughter-in-law while secretly documenting every illegal transaction, every fraudulent deal, every bit of evidence that would bring down the mighty Richard Bennett Sr. "Give me a year," I said finally. "I want to make sure we have everything." But a year turned into 2, then 5, then 10. The deeper I dug, the more complex the fraud became. Richard Sr.'s empire was built on a foundation of lies, each one more elaborate than the last. And I documented all of it, building a case so strong that not even the army of lawyers he kept on retainer would be able to save him. Rich remained oblivious, too caught up in his own world of parties and shopping and living off his trust fund to notice what was happening around him. And Richard Sr. continued to treat me with the same thinly veiled contempt, never suspecting that the woman he forced to sign away her rights was slowly but surely orchestrating his downfall. Until one day, 10 years after I'd signed his precious prenup, everything changed. The call came at midnight, Sarah's voice urgent on the other end of the line. "They know," she said without preamble. "Someone talked. We have to move now." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. How much do they know? Enough to start destroying evidence. If we don't act immediately, we could lose everything we've built. I looked at Rich's empty side of the bed. He was in the Hamptons for the weekend with his latest mistress, not even bothering to hide his infidelities anymore. "Do it," I said, my voice firm. "Launch the investigation tomorrow." As I hung up, my phone lit up with another call, Richard Sr.'s name flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, a small smile playing on my lips as I imagined his face when he realized what was coming. The contract he forced me to sign 10 years ago wouldn't matter much when he was facing federal charges for the largest financial fraud since Bernie Madoff. The next morning, I woke to chaos. My phone was flooded with missed calls and texts, most from Rich and his father. Breaking news alerts flashed across my screen. SEC launches major fraud investigation into Bennett Industries. I took my time getting ready, carefully applying my makeup and choosing a crisp black suit. By the time I arrived at Bennett Industries headquarters, the media circus was in full swing. Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras flashing as executives rushed past with their heads down. Richard Sr.'s secretary tried to stop me as I walked toward his office, but I brushed past her. I found him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear, face red with rage. "I don't care what it takes," he was shouting. "Find out who leaked this to the SEC and shut them down." "No need to look far," I said quietly, closing the door behind me. He spun around, his eyes narrowing as they landed on me. For a moment, he just stared, then understanding slowly dawned on his face. "You," he breathed. "It was you." I sat down in one of his leather chairs, crossing my legs calmly. "Did you really think I was just the naive girl you could bully into submission? That I would sign your contract and spend the rest of my life grateful for whatever scraps of respect you deemed to throw my way?" "You little snake," he snarled, taking a step toward me. "After everything I've given you, everything you've given me?" I laughed, the sound sharp in the tense air. "You've given me nothing but contempt and humiliation for 10 years. But I gave you something in return, enough rope to hang yourself." I pulled out my phone, bringing up a recording app. "Would you like to hear some of our conversations? Like the one from last month's board meeting, where you explicitly detailed how to hide the missing pension funds? Or maybe the call with your friends in the Cayman Islands about the shell companies?" The color drained from his face. "Those recordings are illegal." "Actually, they're not. New York is a one-party consent state, and I consented." I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "But that's just the beginning. 10 years is a long time to gather evidence, Richard. I have everything. Every fraudulent transaction, every cooked book, every bribe and kickback." He fell heavily into his chair, his arrogance finally cracking. "Why? Why go through all this, if it was money you wanted?" "It was never about money," I cut him off. "It was about justice, about showing you that the girl from Queens you looked down on was smarter than you ever imagined." Just then, the door burst open. Rich stood there, disheveled and panicked. "Dad, the FBI is downstairs with a warrant." "Alice? What are you doing here?" "Your wife," Richard Sr. spat, "is the one who turned us in. She's been working with the SEC this whole time." Rich stared at me, his face a mix of confusion and betrayal. "Is that true?" "Like you care," I said, standing up. "How's Jessica, by the way? Or is it Michelle this month?" I lose track of your mistresses. This will never stick, Richard Sr. growled, but his voice lacked conviction. Our lawyers. Your lawyers can't help you, I interrupted. The evidence is ironclad. The SEC has been building this case for a decade. You're finished. As if on cue, FBI agents began filing into the office. Richard Bennett Sr., one announced, you're under arrest for securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. I watched as they led him away in handcuffs, this man who had terrorized and belittled me for so long, now reduced to nothing. Rich tried to follow, protesting loudly, but another agent stopped him. Mr. Bennett, we have some questions for you as well. You can't do this. Rich turned to me, eyes wild. I'm your husband. About that, I pulled an envelope from my bag. These are divorce papers. Don't worry about that prenup your father made me sign. It won't hold up in court when both parties are involved in federal crimes. The next few hours were a blur of federal agents, lawyers, and reporters. Bennett Industries stock was in freefall, and decades of fraud were finally coming to light. I sat in a conference room with Sarah and the FBI, going through the evidence one final time. You did an incredible job, Sarah said quietly. But these next few months won't be easy. The Bennetts still have powerful friends. I nodded, thinking of the threats Richard Sr. had made that day in the bridal suite. I'm not afraid anymore. They can't hurt me now. Later that evening, as I packed up my office, my phone rang. It was my mother. Are you okay? She asked in Mandarin. We're seeing everything on the news. I'm fine, Mom, I replied, looking out at the city lights. Better than fine, actually. It's finally over. Your father and I were so worried when you married into that family, she said softly. We knew how they treated you, but you insisted you had a plan. I did. I smiled, thinking of the long road that had led to this moment. And it worked. When I got home that night, I went straight to my home office. In the back of my safe, behind years of collected evidence, was a small box. Inside was the contract Richard Sr. had forced me to sign on my wedding day. I kept it all these years, a reminder of why I was fighting. I held it up to the light, reading his smug additions one last time. In the event of dissolution of marriage, Alice Zhang forfeits all rights to Bennett family assets. I tossed it into the shredder, watching as the paper that had symbolized my submission was reduced to confetti. The weeks following the arrests were a media frenzy. Bennett Empire Series MBLEs. Wall Street dynasty brought down by daughter-in-law screamed the headlines. News vans camped outside my apartment, reporters calling day and night for interviews. I gave only one, to a journalist who had covered financial fraud for decades. Why did you wait 10 years? She asked, her recorder placed carefully between us. Because I wanted to be thorough, I replied. The Bennetts had hurt a lot of people, employees whose pensions disappeared, investors who lost everything. They deserved more than just a slap on the wrist. They deserved to lose everything just like their victims did. The investigation revealed the true scope of the Bennett's crimes. Over $3 billion had been stolen through various schemes. Richard Sr. had been running a Ponzi scheme that made Bernie Madoff look amateur, using new investments to pay off old ones while siphoning billions into offshore accounts. Rich, it turned out, wasn't as ignorant as he pretended to be. Evidence showed he'd been actively involved in laundering money through his various business ventures, all failures that somehow still made millions. One morning, about a month after the arrests, I received a call from Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Richard Sr. wanted to meet. I found him sitting in the visitor's room, his designer suit replaced by prison orange, his carefully manicured appearance now ragged and unkempt. Come to gloat? He asked as I sat down. No, I replied calmly. I came because I wanted you to understand something. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. Justice? You destroyed a family legacy that took generations to build. You destroyed it. I corrected him. I just exposed the truth. Those people you stole from, the employees, the investors, the pensioners, they trusted you. And you saw them the same way you saw me, as beneath you, unworthy of basic respect. So righteous, he sneered. And what about my son? Your husband. Did he deserve this too? I pulled out my phone, showing him photos of Rich with his various mistresses over the years. Rich made his own choices. He chose to follow in your footsteps, to believe he was above the law. Now he can face the consequences, just like you. As I stood to leave, he called after me. You know what's funny? If I hadn't made you sign that prenup, if I'd welcomed you into the family, none of this would have happened. I turned back, smiling slightly. That's where you're wrong. I was investigating Bennett Industries before I even met Rich. That's why I took the job at Goldman, to get closer to your company's records. Meeting your son, having him fall for me, that was just luck. The look on his face, the realization that his own prejudice and arrogance had been his undoing, was something I'd remember forever. The divorce proceedings were swift, given that both Rich and his father were facing lengthy prison sentences. The prenup was thrown out, and as one of the key witnesses who had helped bring down the fraud, I was entitled to a percentage of any recovered funds as a whistleblower reward. But I didn't want their money. Instead, I worked with the federal prosecutors to establish a restitution fund for Bennett Industries victims. The offshore accounts Richard Sr. had hidden were seized, the assets liquidated to repay the people they'd stolen from. Sarah called me one evening as I was packing up my apartment. I decided to leave New York to start fresh somewhere new. The judge just handed down the sentences, she said. Richard Sr. got 25 years. Rich got 15. I sat down on my half-packed couch, letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 10 years. It's really over. You did an amazing thing, Alice, Sarah said softly. You took down one of the most powerful families in New York. Not bad for a girl from Queens. I laughed, thinking of all the times Richard Sr. had thrown my background in my face. My parents always taught me that true worth isn't about money or status. It's about integrity, about standing up for what's right. Speaking of my parents, they had finally told me something that made everything feel like destiny. 20 years ago, they had been among Richard Sr.'s victims, losing their life savings in one of his earlier schemes. They'd never told me, never wanted me to carry that burden. Finding out had only confirmed that I'd done the right thing. 6 months later, I stood in front of a classroom at Columbia Business School, where I'd been invited to give a guest lecture on corporate fraud and whistleblower protection. Looking out at the eager faces of the students, I saw myself at their age, ambitious, determined, believing in the power of truth and justice. The greatest weapon against corruption, I told them, isn't just knowledge or evidence. It's patience, the willingness to play the long game, to endure humiliation and doubt, knowing that truth will eventually prevail. After the lecture, a young woman approached me. Ms. Zhang, she said hesitantly, I'm from a similar background as you. Sometimes it feels like the odds are stacked against people like us in this industry. I smiled, remembering how alone I felt 10 years ago. The odds are only stacked against us if we accept other people's limitations. Never let anyone make you feel small. Your background, your different perspective, that's your strength. That evening, I visited my parents' accounting firm. They'd managed to rebuild after losing everything to the Bennetts, their resilience teaching me more about strength than any Ivy League education could. We're so proud of you, my mother said in Mandarin, hugging me tight. You fought for what was right, no matter the cost. My father, ever practical, added, and you showed them that a girl from Queens can bring down an empire. I laughed, feeling truly free for the first time in years. The contract that had once symbolized my submission was now just shredded paper, and the man who had tried to break my spirit was facing the consequences of his actions. As I drove home that night, I passed the former Bennett Industries building, now bearing a different company's name. The empire Richard Sr. had built through fraud and intimidation had crumbled, but something better would rise from its ashes, a reminder that justice, though slow, was inevitable. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Just heard Rich is trying to appeal his sentence. Want to grab coffee and laugh about it? I smiled, typing back a response. The Bennetts had thought their money and status made them untouchable. They never imagined that the woman they'd looked down on would be their undoing. But that's the thing about prejudice and arrogance. It blinds you to the strength of those you underestimate. And in the end, that was Richard Sr.'s greatest mistake. He never saw me coming.